Hey guys, I'm Joe Pollock, and today I'm going to be walking us through Chapter 8 of our textbook, The Ethics of Photo and Video Journalism. So some background information. This all kind of began with a case of Abigail Roberson after she found her image being used for advertising a brand of flour. She found it on posters, she found it even painted on the sides of barns, and she ended up losing her case because there were no privacy laws at the time. However, a year later, the first privacy law did pass in the US because they realized that images and they judged that images are personal and intimate and subjective. Advancements in technology also caused for the popularizing of the concept of citizen journalism. Photos and videos can be made and posted immediately, so that made it accessible for anyone to go on ahead and post as soon as something was happening at the scene of some major event. Some of the problems that it pointed out with photojournalism. So Arthur Berger said, a picture is always an interpretation of reality, not reality itself. This is because of the variables of photography, so camera angles, use of light and texture and focus, so that cameras are also looked at, they capture an isolated reality. John Berger said, what the camera does and what the eye can never do is to fix the appearance of the event. So cameras don't capture the full reality of a situation just because you can't sit there and look at it. You're looking at it from a very specific perspective, whatever that perspective of the photojournalist was. And the role of journalism is to take these isolated or these images that create an isolated reality and to put context back into these images. So a huge question that was asked throughout this chapter was when and when not to shoot. This is a basic decision a journalist has to make before capturing a photo, since subjects of these photos often don't have any kind of position to deny the photographer access to the event. People possess several territories, however, that they have the right to control. The first being the right to personal space, free from intrusion, and that intrusion could also be a camera lens. And then the second one is the right to preserve one's information, and this information doesn't have to be like our social security or something like that. This information could be something like our state of joy or a state of grief, and if we want to keep that from public view, we have the right to do that. Another thing is Gary Bryant has a checklist that he goes through when reaching the scene of a tragedy. The first question on this is, should this moment be made in public? The next, will being photographed send the subjects into further trauma? Am I at the least obtrusive distance possible, and am I acting with compassion and sensitivity? Photographers also have to wrestle with this dilemma of treating each subject as an end and not as a means to an end. How do photographers discern whether or not a message dealing with a tragedy needs to be told? Well, to find the answer to this, Warren Beauvais created a set of questions. So the first one, starting off, is, are the means truly morally evil or merely distasteful? Is the end a real good or something that merely appears to be good? Is it probable that the means will achieve the end? Is the same good possible using other means? Is the good end clearly greater than any evil means used to attain it? And will the means used to achieve the end withstand the test of publicity? And some of the main conclusions that came before we got into the case studies were, so the debate of visual ethics is emotionally charged and constantly changing with technology. So as technology evolves and visual images can be manipulated, this argument changes as well. Photography is also a low-paying job. So something we have to understand, and a perspective of this argument is that when a photographer has the chance to capture a gripping photo, ethics can be an afterthought, and we also have to think about a photographer's loyalties, and one of those loyalties being to his family if he has one, and to having to provide and pay the bills, and things such as that. So we have to think of a photographer's loyalties when they are capturing these photos, and then later editors publishing them. And then the last conclusion is a version of Kant's categorical imperative for photojournalists to operate under. And it says, don't deceive a trusting audience with manipulated reality, and don't offend an unsuspecting audience when you're gritty with your gritty reality. So pretty much to make sure that your action isn't coming from a deceptive or manipulating place, but that it's but that these photos are being taken to capture a reality that is accurate, and that you can show to the public to show them the severity of a situation in some cases. So the case I decided to cover is case 8G, which is called Death in Print, publication of Hurricane Katrina photographs. So some background information. So the first thing when deciding whether or not these photos of Hurricane Katrina needed to be published, a lot of newspapers had to ask, do we publish this photograph of a dead body? And this case study examines the coverage of Hurricane Katrina in 3 different newspapers: the Los Angeles Times, the Chicago Tribune, and the St. Louis Post-Dispatch. The study examines whether or not these newspapers published the James Nielsen photograph provided by Getty Images. This image is an image of a corpse being or floating underneath a bypass, and a woman looking over it from a bridge. And some other background information is to understand how the selection process of pictures works when putting them in newspapers. So the first part is editors review all the available photos, and then a formal meeting takes place with all photo editors, or a full newsroom staff meeting. Another thing that is really important are A1 meetings. A1 is the front page, so these meetings, they discuss what goes on the front page, and in this we'll be looking at how they discussed what photos would go on the front page. So the first one we'll look at is the St. Louis Post-Dispatch. So they are ranked 21st nationally in circulation among American newspapers. Nielsen's photo was published on A10, so on the 10th page, the photograph of the corpse floating in the water was published there. And it was cropped to put visual emphasis on the corpse, on the woman looking on, and on a bag of trash that was floating next to the corpse. They ended up placing Dave Martin's photo of people boarding buses in New Orleans on the front page instead. So Larry Coyne, he's the director of photography for the Post-Dispatch. He argued for Nielsen's photo to make A1. He said that the photos showed the tragedy of Katrina and how people were trying to continue with their everyday lives. He went on to say, to get a full understanding, you have to see it. Until you see it, it is a figment of your imagination. So Coyne wanted the public to have an understanding of what was truly going on in New Orleans, and to explain that the death toll was rising at the time as well. Coyne mentioned that during the A1 meeting there was a lot of conflict surrounding the photo, and people were trying to decide whether or not the photo trivialized the events of Katrina. And for that reason, they didn't end up putting it on the front page. but later on in the newspaper, the majority decided to run that bus photo as the lead because they believed it was more relevant to the story that the edition of the newspaper was trying to tell at that time. The next one is the Los Angeles Times. It ranks 4th nationally in circulation with over 1 million circulation on Sundays. It published 15 Katrina photos, one of them being the Nielsen photo. And the Nielsen photo was actually ran on the middle of the front page, right below the lead photo. The lead photo was a photo of people boarding buses outside the Superdome, and it showed a mob of them arguing, and they went with that one as the lead. Steve Stroud, the director of photography, said they considered not running the Nielsen photo at all because of its graphic nature. However, they looked at it and they just realized that it accurately represented one of the major stories that was coming out of the event that day, which was the death toll. And they realized that it was a relevant photo for people to see and people to know, so they could get a grip on what was truly happening. And Stroud stated, "Our role is to inform people and remind people in a way that is appropriate to the event." The Ainsworth photo was selected as the leading image, the photo of people arguing while they were getting onto the buses, because it was a more active photo and it better represented the chaos and affected more people. The last one to look at is the Chicago Tribune. It ranks 6th nationally in circulation. It published 17 different Katrina photos in its edition that was ran on the 2nd of September. The Nielsen photo actually didn't get ran in that one. It got ran in edition on the 4th. That was a special report edition on Hurricane Katrina. The lead image on September 2nd was Mark Wilson's photo that showed crying women trying to help a relative who appeared to be fighting death outside the New Orleans Convention Center. They just decided not to run it specifically for what their edition was trying to say that ran on the 2nd. So they just ended up adding it as one of their more important photos on the 4th. Some micro issues that are dealt with here is the biggest one to me is the Nielsen photo, a page 1 photo on the 5th day of the tragedy, why or why not. So pretty much, does it fit the story? Does it fit what's happening with Hurricane Katrina at the moment? But that's just a micro issue. When we look at the mid-range issues, some of them are, does moving a controversial photo to the inside pages of a newspaper allow the editors more latitude in what they show, why or why not? Or if the body had been recognizable, would that change your opinion of running the photo? Or taking it a step further, if the body had been unrecognizable but naked, would that change your opinion? So looking at some bigger reasons of why or why not to run the photo. And then the macro issues, the biggest one being in weighing the good of educating the public to the horrors of Katrina tragedy versus the bad of shocking the readership. Where do we stand on running the photo? And then when the bad is the invasion of privacy of the dead individuals, where do you stand on running this photo? So looking at big picture questions here, is it more important to educate people on what's truly happening in Katrina, or is it better for us to scale it back? That way we're not shocking readers with graphic images. So what would some of the philosophers have to say about this? So Aristotle, obviously, he would look at the character himself. So I don't know if I could give an exact answer on what Aristotle would do here without knowing the photographer himself and how he acts on a basis of his morals. However, I can say that if if the photojournalist is acting in between two extremes where virtue is found, then Aristotle would have no problem with the person's actual actions. Whereas if we look at Kant, Kant looks at the action itself and the motive that goes with that action. So what is the motive behind it? Is the motive to give viewers an accurate representation of Katrina, or is it to have their photo on the front page where they are making more money off of it? And so it all just depends on where the person's heart lies behind deciding to act that way. So if it's coming from a place of I want to inform the public of what's happening and educate them, then I think Kant would say yes. And Kant would not only take the photo, but Kant would publish the photo too. Mill, he focuses on the consequence behind the action. So that's looking at who is the majority being, or is the majority experiencing pleasure with the outcome. And so which result makes the happiest outcome? Well, with a tragedy like this, I don't know if there can be a specific outcome that's necessarily happy. But so for that reason, I would say that Mill would publish the photo because it would benefit those financially who work for the paper. And in that way, it would also educate people on what was going on, and it would most benefit the population by publishing the photo. And as for myself, I would first look at Gary Bryant's checklist of questions and run through that, and then if it all matched up, then I would decide to take the photo. As far as it goes with publishing it, I would look at what, or kind of side with what Kant would look at is what's the person's motive for acting the way they act. So with myself, I would want to benefit the public, and I would want the public to be educated on and accurately know what is happening in New Orleans and with Katrina. So I would myself publish the photos on the front page so people, as many people as possible could see. And then my question that I picked out is which question is not a part of Gary Bryant's checklist he goes through in hundredths of a second when he reaches the scene of a tragedy. A, should this moment be made public? B, will being photographed send the subjects into further trauma? C, am I close enough to get a high quality shot of the situation? Or D, am I acting with compassion and sensitivity? And the answer would be C, am I close enough to get a high quality shot of the situation? Because that is not something you think about when you're looking at what is morally right before taking a picture. That's more of a professional question you would ask. So the answer for that is C. That's my presentation. I wasn't able to get the PowerPoint fixed right, so the PowerPoint will be linked with this video. Yeah, that's it. Bye, guys.